It's late May 1940. The Maginot Line that the French invested so much time and money in and so many hopes in is now a bypassed anachronism. The Anglo-French armies that were capable of field action are now trapped in central Belgium as the Germans have done a 1-2 punch to Metz and then up to the English Channel, trapping and isolating these armies, waiting for destruction. But just as the armies are beginning to close in, Hitler and the generals order a halt. Hitler orders a halt. Either he was afraid of flanking attacks along his exposed supply lines, which the French proved incapable of doing, or he wanted to give his old friend Hermann Goering an opportunity to let the Air Force strut its stuff by destroying an army on the ground, which Air Forces really can't do without atomic weapons. Or there's a third thing. Hitler does not want a war with Britain. First of all, racially. Britain is composed of Anglo-Saxons. England particularly dominates the Celts of Scotland and Wales and Ireland. England is what Hitler thinks is the heart of Britain. In fact, the Germans rarely call them British. They call them Anglanders, Englanders, English, Angles. They're fellow Germanic people. They're fellow Aryans. So Hitler has a respect for the English, who he fought for years in the trenches. He has good reason to respect the English. They're good soldiers. Hitler wants to do a deal with Britain. And he can't do a deal with people that are so angry that they can't think straight. It's entirely possible that Hitler's calculation is that if we destroy and kill all of the British soldiers in the Anglo-French Mobile Army pocket in central Belgium, that it will drive the British into a frothing fury that will prevent them from being reasonable about making peace after France falls. So for whatever reason, fear of flanking attacks, a desire to let the Air Force shine, or a desire not to infuriate the British, or all three, the armies halt. And while those armies halt, Churchill orders Operation Dynamo. The little ships, the lobster boats, the fishing vessels, the ferries, all the pleasure yachts, all the small craft that make up Britain's maritime industry are invited. If you can get to the port of Dunkirk, go there. Go to Dunkirk and rescue our army. So from ports all over the south, southeast, and east of England, the small boats come. By the hundreds they come. The movie Dunkirk doesn't do a bad job of showing this. There are others that do too. But what you need to understand is local fishermen with local fishing boats, not warships, slow, vulnerable wooden fishing boats, gather up their fuel, cast off their lines, and with their fishermen, they putt across the English Channel and the southern North Sea to go into a war zone where they're going to be bombed by aircraft, strafed by aircraft, that's when aircraft shoot machine guns as they go by, shelled by artillery, sunk by submarines. They're going into combat in a fishing vessel or a pleasure yacht. Some of these ships were powered by sails, but they came by the hundreds. Off of the beaches and off of a single pier, the British began evacuating. They have to leave all their guns, all their tanks, all their artillery, all their supplies behind. A few French are going to be rescued too. But in this case, the French army deserves credit. Because what the French army does while the British are moving up towards the beaches is they establish a defensive position around Dunkirk. And they are going to hold the line while the Germans resume their attack. And eventually they will. They estimate maybe that they'll get 50, 60, 80, maybe 100,000 men off the beaches before the Germans take the beaches. But because of the halt that Hitler ordered, they get over 500,000 men off those beaches and off that dock. The cream of the British officer corps, the officers and sergeants who lead the British Army, who are professional soldiers, who understand war, who have retained the British tradition of fighting war, are brought out. Britain's soldiers are brought out in massive numbers. Some French soldiers, too, are brought out. By the time Hitler realizes his mistake, it's really too late. Most of the British forces have been evacuated. Some of the French forces have evacuated. Hitler orders his attackers to continue, and they pinch off, and Dunkirk is finally taken by the Germans. Now, the Germans then, having disposed of, to some extent, I mean, the British, yeah, they have all this talent, but they don't have many guns. They actually, Britain engaged in massive gun control during the 1920s and 30s, to the point where there weren't many hunting rifles in Britain. So the British government and people begged the United States to send them anything, any kind of firearm, in case the British Isles were attacked. Something to think about, as you think about the fact that whenever any totalitarian government takes over, the very first thing they do is make sure that the only people who have guns are controlled by them, not private civilians. So the British are terrified of an invasion, but the French are still intact. The best French armies have been destroyed, but there are still other French armies, and there are the forces in the Maginot Line. But at this point, France seems like it's suffered a stroke. The French leadership dithers. It prevaricates. The French army does not focus on its task. The British even send some relief forces to try to set up a second front. But it becomes clear that the French will to fight is broken. Within 6 weeks of the beginning of the attack, the Germans have marched through Paris, and the French surrender. What the French agree to at their surrender is that Germany will get Alsace-Lorraine back, Germany will control northern France, the industrial region, and the entire coast of the Atlantic Ocean, the Bay of Biscay, and so forth. The France that remains will be run from the water springs city of Vichy, and Vichy, France is going to collaborate. Oh, and Vichy, France also has to give up territory to the Allies because the Italians, at the point where it becomes clear that the French army is defeated, invade and take back Savoy and Nice, and that has to be given to the Italians. When President Roosevelt of the United States, Franklin D. Roosevelt, heard that the French were attacked by Italy, he compared Italy to a gangster that wields a stiletto and stabs the back of his neighbor. Actually, the border doesn't go all the way up to there. So, Vichy France is a shadow of its former self, and it ends up getting run by a collaborator named Pierre Laval and an old World War I field marshal named Pétain, Henri-Philippe Pétain, the hero of the Battle of Verdun. Pétain spends his later years collaborating with Nazi Germany, and his argument is that if he didn't collaborate, the French would have been treated much worse. That his collaboration saved French lives. You can be the judge of that. So by the middle of June 1940, France has completely collapsed. France has surrendered. Before we go on, why? Why are the French, who have a history of successful warfare going back since, all the way to the Franks at the end of the Roman Empire, why do they collapse so quickly and so totally? Why are they broken after the German penetration of their lines? The problem is that France is so politically divided against itself that they hate each other more than they hate the outsider. There are Frenchmen who'd rather be ruled by a German stooge than by people on the other side. The communists hate the socialists and they hate the bourgeois parties. The bourgeoisie hate the communists and fear that the socialists are basically communist stooges. There are monarchists and ultramontane hyper-Catholics who want France to return to an earlier day. France is divided so strongly. It really was a house of cards waiting for a gust of wind. This is a cautionary tale. We should never get so divided that we hate each other, our political opponents domestically, more than we are afraid of a foreign conqueror coming in and turning us all into slaves. We should never get to the point where we hate Donald Trump or the Democrat leadership of Congress, Nancy Pelosi, more than we are concerned about, say, Xi Jinping or Vladimir Putin or some other foreign leader trying to take advantage of our weakness and exploit our weakness and end up somehow gaining dominion over us. It happened to France, and it was a very, very nasty result. So, it is now the middle of June 1940, and the Battle of France is over.